everyone to Little Big Lectures. Today we have a tiny lecture with a big idea. Today's lecture is all about black holes. I got news for you. Black holes, they're not black and they're not holes. Who knew? What you gonna do? So I'm gonna jot that down here. Black holes, they are not black. Which is kind of funny to think about. We all hear about black holes, we've heard about them, but what are not black? And they are not holes. So what are these things if they're not black? Basically what we're referring to there when we say they're not black, you have to think of black holes basically with black holes, you gotta think that all it means is that light is trying to get to this black hole, this object in space. As light is traveling there, it actually gets pulled into the gravity and then the light can't come back out. So the light can't be reflected back, nor is it absorbed. So we usually think about light being absorbed or reflected. Well, in this case, the black hole is not absorbing or reflecting, so you just can't see it. There's just nothing there. So all the light that goes there just gets sucked in by this black hole and we don't see anything. So it's more like this emptiness or this void that you can't even see. Thus, black, but it's not actually black. It's just this emptiness, this void, which is kind of cool. And then why I say it's not a hole here, it's not a hole because really it's a singularity. Scientists, this just has a really cool name, but it's really more of a singularity or a point, a single point in space. And so it's kind of hard to wrap your mind around. It's just a very tiny single point. That's what physicists and cosmologists and all these other fancy guys with degrees and stuff that they like to think about is it's a single point in space. And so really that's the way to think about it. This term, black hole, it was actually coined by a genius physicist guy. It was coined by Mr. John Archibald Wheeler. I'll just put here John Wheeler for simplicity. So this is actually coined by John Archibald Wheeler. He was a physicist and he worked on general relativity and black holes and stuff. And he actually coined the term black hole because he's like, why not? It makes a lot more sense just to call it a black hole and be done with it. So that's what we did. So it comes from him. But the actual math behind a black hole, pretty cool. This actually came from a dude, in case you guys want to know, named Carl Schwarzschild, which has an interesting name here. I forget what his nationality was. Mr. Schwarzschild here, or I call him the Star Child. He had a sweet epic mustache, and he actually figured out some of Einstein's general relativity field equations, some of the complicated math behind those equations. And this guy with the epic mustache and the brilliant mega genius mind, he actually figured out some of these equations and the math behind a black hole, behind a singularity based on Einstein's space and time warping, all those effects. And so he was actually the first one to figure that out and be like, oh, I got this whole math thing figured out and it does work and it's a singularity and pulls stuff in and it's crazy. And he's kind of the first one to lay down the math behind like the event horizon, the point at which if you get too close to a black hole, you'll get sucked in forever and you'll never come back. Pretty crazy. So he's the first one to figure that out, and so he's kind of the modern day. This was in 1915 that he first figured this out. John Wheeler names it much later on, I believe in the 60s or 70s. He actually named it because of the cool name black hole, which we all know of, which is not black and it's not a hole, but there we go. We got cool names for all this crazy astronomical stuff out there. So again, we can't see it, but we can only feel its effects. So astronomers really feel the effects. I have kind of a drawing here for us. But a black hole is just pulling stuff in, and so astronomers just really see the effects of the black hole. So that's really what's going on there, is that you can see the effects around a star, around planets, in the middle of galaxies very often, supermassive black holes. So astronomers can measure the gravity and the mass of these things because they're super duper massive. And so that's really why we know that black holes exist while they're out there. So we can't really see them because they are these empty voids kind of, but we can feel their effects based on their gravitational pull and their super duper mass that they have. Now black holes are formed, I have my expert drawing here, when a supermassive star actually collapses. So what happens is super duper massive stars that are much more massive than our sun, if they're too massive, gravity, when it sheds its outer layers, it goes supernova, it goes kabang. So a star will go super duper nova, or Gabachkin as I like to say. So it'll go Gabachkin, and when it goes supernova, it'll shed its outer layers, creating a beautiful planetary nebula. But if it's massive enough, the pressure and the gravity, all that pressure was kind of fighting its gravity, but because all those outer layers are gone, the gravity actually wins out in supermassive stars, and it will just collapse in on itself, and it's almost like an implosion. And so what happens is this core of the star, if it's massive enough, it'll just shrink down and it'll just tear a hole through space and time. Black hole time. Here we go. So it would actually rip a hole through itself and go, and it rips this crazy hole through space and time. And that's a black hole. Pretty crazy. So this is how they are generated. Now, like I said, our star, our sun, will create in of its life cycle, it'll just create a planetary nebula, and it will likely just be a white dwarf. So it could either become a white dwarf or a neutron star. In this case, very, very super duper massive stars will become black holes at the end of their life cycle. Pretty epic, pretty crazy. And as I said too, what happens is they actually collapse, and it's good to think of it not as a whole, but as this collapsing wave. So like it just takes everything with it and it bends. It's almost like if you have this fabric, and if you had a star, it kind of would bend down, just like general relativity would bend and droop. But then the black hole would go, and it would rip all the way through that fabric, and it would just keep bending and bending until you rip the fabric, because it's so dense and it's so massive, it just collapses and rips a hole through space and time. Nothing can escape, including light. Pretty crazy, pretty epic. And no one knows what happens inside of a black hole except Matthew McConaughey. And that'll be all today for our little big lecture. Hope you guys like the small talk on black holes, which are not black holes at all. See you next time.